Started. Good morning, everyone.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Ward, and I'm just glad to see everybody here today. We're just going to get started with a welcome that Rose is going to read for us.
So this is, Carolyn picked it, and I think she did a really good job. It's called Heart Full or Heart Empty by Krista Taves, or Taves, I'm not sure which. Whether you have come here with a heart full or a heart empty, with spirits high or low, rested or tiring, hopeful or despairing, whether we have come here out of habit, conviction, loneliness, or curiosity, you belong here because you are here. And all that you have and all that you are is welcome here. This morning we are together, the heartbeat of this congregation.
Thanks, Rose. All right, and I am going to share some music today, hopefully. It's Where is the Love by Black Eyed Peas. So bear with me while I get this up. All right. So now I'd like to take some time to share joys and concerns I had. I have two joys. On February 16th, Matt Benica and Bob McDaniel both share a birthday. Matt will turn 44 on the 16th. I'm not sure about Bob's age, but young at heart still. And if anyone else has any joys or concerns or announcements, feel free to share.
This is David. So a little update on Shannon Roy and a request. Shannon has started taking some nourishment, which is good. She's still in hospice for failure to thrive. And she's not doing really well. And her comment to her sister was, I want to die, but I got real hungry. I don't know. At any rate, the problem is that she's got a couple of cats. She's got one of her cats with her. And there's a couple of cats that she had that were outside cats. One kind of comes in and out. They're being cared for right now by a neighbor, which can't go on forever. If you have room in your home or outside your home and in your heart for a couple of cats, they're very nice cats, I will say. They can be rounded up and transferred, but they need to be before they either get hit or rounded up by the authorities. So if anyone can accommodate these cats, please get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with Shannon's sister, and hopefully we can get that resolved. Thank you.
All right. Any other joys or concerns or announcements? If not, Susanna is going to do our chalice lighting.
And this again was chosen by Carolyn. This is Love Can Transform the World by Maureen Killeron. The doodled word love over a stylistic heart. Love is the aspiration, the spirit that moves and inspires this faith we share. Rightly understood, love can nurture our spirits and transform the world. May the flame of this chalice stay lit. Here we go. May the flame of this chalice honor and embody the power and the blessing of the love we need, the love we give, the love we are, challenged always to remember and to share.
Thanks, Susanna. So as I was preparing for this program, I came across some information that I wanted to share to you with just a reminder that today is the day before Valentine's Day. Several years ago, the UU earmarked Valentine's Day as an opportunity to celebrate love and light. It's an annual celebration of compassion that lifts up self-sacrificing, all-encompassing love and the power of sacred trust between people. Driven by the firm conviction that every person deserves recognition in their inherent worth and dignity, Unitarian Universalists are called to reach out, affirm, and embrace the other in radical compassion, while simultaneously working to ameliorate situations where people are being denied their humanity. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Aileen Berquist with the ACLU of Kansas. Eileen's going to share with us about her work with the Kansas legislative session and the ACLU's legislative agenda, and we will allow time for question and answer after Aileen gives us some great information about what's happening today. All right.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I wanted to say thank you for allowing me to join you today in this space. A special thank to Rose, who did the legwork to set this up. I'm really grateful that we have this opportunity to connect. I was hoping before I jumped in that maybe we could do something in the chat to get to kind of know you. Rose smiled a little bit because this is pretty typical of something organizers do. It would be really helpful to know, have you ever been to the state capitol, either ours or anywhere else you've lived? And if so, what were you there for? And I already know Mary Galligan's answer because she is an amazing person who has been working in our state a long time.
Carolyn or the host may need to open up the comments.
Is that possible?
Or read them off if people can only message one of y'all.
Or we could come off mute briefly for those folks who have something they want to share. If that would be easier, Carolyn.
Well, I have been there a couple of times. It's been several years to testify, but before legislative committees.
Nice. Thank you for doing that.
And also to visit
Fantastic. That's great to hear.
Of course, I've been there for political reasons, but I've also taken my kids on the tour there. I feel like some folks here have probably also at least taken the tour.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous building. Even if you're not there for anything specific, just show up and wander around. It's lovely. Ooh, the chat should be open now. So if you don't want to speak up, feel free. So the question is, have you ever been to the State House? And if so, for what reason? What were you doing there? Nancy, it looks like you came off mute.
I was at a hearing, one hearing once. I've been there several times for gatherings in the rotunda for political reasons. Been on the steps before for issues, those things.
A gathering of people in the people's house. I love that. While other people are typing in their comments, I have a really fantastic intern this year for the legislative session who is a 1L at Washburn Law. And I had her bring me some things at the Capitol one day, and she was astounded. She was so excited that she could just walk in. She didn't have to have official business. She didn't have to have a badge or identification. And I reminded her, this is the people's house. You deserve to have access to this place. You danced at the State House. That's amazing. I would love to hear that story someday. Fantastic. Girl Scout. My mom was in Camp Fire. Very cool. Well, that's great. That makes me really happy. One of the things that I was considering going over, but I think I'll just send you a link. I'll send it out to Carolyn afterwards as a resource, is kind of an overview of how to get information on the Kansas Legislative website. So if there's an issue you're interested in or a bill you want to track, how to keep on top of that. So I can send that out afterwards instead of kind of showing my screen and walking you all through how to find that information. It might be easier just to look at that afterwards. So a little bit about me. I joined the ACLU of Kansas in June of last year. I am a Kansas native, and I keep finding myself back here. This is home. This is where I want to spend the majority of my life. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served 2 years in a village in central Botswana, teaching life skills at a primary school. And more recently, before ACLU, I went to Washington, D.C. to get my master's in legislative affairs and work in advocacy, campaigns, and policy. So at the ACLU, my title is Community Engagement Manager, which doesn't tell you much of anything. Basically, I'm an advocacy department of one right now, but we are hiring soon. And so what I do right now is I coordinate getting information out to volunteers via our email list and coordinating with coalitions. But currently my primary job is as the ACLU's lobbyist in Topeka. Carolyn did ask me to say, before I get into the nitty gritty and start talking about bills, she did say that the theme today was centered around love and mankind. And I was trying to come up with an inspiring story or a quote of some kind. But honestly, this week I kept coming back to how much stress and frustration I felt at the Capitol, which I'm sure is something that a lot of people feel interacting with politics. And just sometimes sheer bafflement at the actions of others. So my constant mantra this week was to remind myself of common humanity. And the other thing I come back to is the line from the Christian Bible, faith without works is dead. I also think that love without works is dead. There is a lot of hate in the world, to be sure, but there's also a lot of well-intentioned people who have found comfort in apathy, or in the knowledge that they don't think they are perpetuating direct wrongs, and so they don't necessarily get involved in fighting injustice. But I truly believe what Angela Davis said, that in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist. And I believe that about all sorts of injustices. So putting action behind our beliefs and taking an affirmative response against civil rights injustices is really important. So along those lines, I'm going to share my screen real quick. I didn't want to have a big PowerPoint, because I know everyone is probably tired of looking at PowerPoints at this point in our lives in the pandemic. But I was hoping in the chat, there are three main issues that we've been focusing on at the State House, and they are redistricting, voting rights, and criminal legal reform, or what you may have heard, criminal justice reform. And I'm wondering, kind of maybe a show of hands, what are folks interested in, or maybe put it in the chat. What would you like to focus on today? And I'm happy to kind of review those bills and talk about what's going on around them. And then I can send all the information out afterwards. So maybe voting rights. Yeah, Mary. Okay. That's an easy one.
All three of them.
All three of them. Happy to do that as well. I don't know how much time y'all have today, so.
I'd like to hear about the redistricting controversy,
Okay.
particularly why they're putting Lawrence in western Kansas.
Where could our people power be the most useful in achieving a win? Ooh, I have so many ideas. All right, so why don't we, someone just shared. Oh, yeah, you're talking about the CRT stuff. Okay. That is also something we're working on. So I do want to start this with a caveat. I put this into three main categories: redistricting, voting rights, and criminal legal reform. But the ACLU is keeping an eye on and doing work on a lot of different issues, including pushing back on these narratives about teaching the truth of our history in schools. I don't like to use the term critical race theory because I think it's a red herring, and it's an umbrella term that's being used a lot to mean a lot of different things. So why don't we start with redistricting? Okay, I think I can do that. Just a moment. So I think this is probably a pretty well-informed group. So I will try not to give too much background, but every 10 years, there is a census in the United States. And based on that census, every state has to redraw the boundaries they use to define their voting districts. So those are your congressional maps, your representative and your senator who go to Washington, D.C. and represent our state there. But there are also our local maps for our state legislature and our Board of Education. So these lines have an incredible impact on how communities are represented. If you took high school civics at any time, I'm sure you learned about gerrymandering, and it was named after someone, name was Jerry something, who drew a map that was absolutely absurd and did not reflect the reality of the political situation. It was breaking up a group of voters in a way specifically intentioned to disenfranchise them. So cracking or packing, breaking up districts, or putting people together so that their votes can't influence other districts. I'm sure there are lots of fun explainers online, but redistricting in Kansas has a very interesting history. 10 years ago, as Mary Galligan can attest to, we had a very fraught redistricting cycle. We couldn't come to agreement in the state legislature about maps. And so it ended up having to go to the courts. And the courts drew the lines that defined our districts for these past 10 years. Where we're at now is, I would not hesitate to say, even more complex than that last time around. So I believe it was in the fall of 2020, then Senate President Susan Wagle was caught on camera being very specific and pointed that they hoped when they redrew the congressional maps that they could draw Sharice Davids out of her district. And that sort of set the tone for where we are now. The process so far has been very rushed. It has been very opaque. It's been very hard to get information out of the people making decisions about these maps, to know when the maps are becoming public, when data is going to be public, when people will have opportunities to speak. And recently we've had a lot of steamrolling. So quick introductions of things and pushing them through with very limited time or opportunity for people to give input or to fight back. Because of what had come before, many of us were concerned that maps were already drawn before the process was started. And that it would be, because of the way that the parties are balanced, that would be hard for a bipartisan solution to come about to change those maps. So there are two things, because of those realities, that we all wanted to focus on. And I want to say that when I say we in the context of redistricting, I'm not talking about the ACLU of Kansas alone. I'm talking about the KS Fair Maps Coalition. And you can find their website at ksfairmaps.org. This is a fantastic group of people. Oh yes, Mary Galligan in the chat, please do share. So we decided pretty early on as the ACLU and the coalition, like our focus was going to be on two things: public engagement, making sure we had as many people as possible speaking to the problems with the process and the maps. So KS Fair Maps has been a really incredible example of what happens when community groups come together in good faith with no ego and a real mutual support. And I've learned a lot from these coalition members. They coordinated launching a website to share information, held multiple trainings on the process, developing testimony and how to get others involved. And the response from the community was fantastic. We're talking about redistricting. This is not something that is easy for the lay person to grasp. Even those of us who are pretty comfortable with policy issues, this has been very complicated. But we had hundreds of people submitting testimony. Close to 800 people emailed the governor to ask her to veto the Ad Astra 2 map. So there's been some really fantastic response. Where we're at right now, a map was introduced by leadership in from the Republican Party, so the people who have the majority. And that map very much, we believe, disenfranchises a number of communities. It breaks apart the urban core of Kansas City, which from the beginning has been a very strong and vocal community of interest that they want to stay together. But this map breaks Wyandotte County in half, thus diluting the power of the urban KC vote. So these are the folks who put Sharice Davids in office. And so you can see how that would be some pretty obvious gerrymandering. Another example is carving Lawrence, Kansas, as we all know, a little liberal blue dot. I'm a proud Lawrencian. Out of our previous district, the second, and putting it in the first. So that's the district that goes all the way to the Colorado border. So trying to keep communities of interest together is a primary concern for these maps. Trying to make sure you are not disenfranchising communities that vote together consistently is another big part. And it is pretty obvious to many people, community members and lots of organizations, that these maps did not do that. They did not follow the rules of redistricting, and they may have broken the law. So I can't speak at this point to potential litigation, and that's what I get asked constantly by reporters, by community members, by partners. I can say that there are people who will be filing suit, and that you should keep an eye on the news or sign up for ACLU updates if you want to know what that's going to look like, who's involved, all of those things. At this time, though it feels like we have been doing this for years now, we only have congressional maps done. And those, we're not sure what's going to happen with those. We still have to draw our local maps. So I highly recommend that you go to the ksfairmaps.org website and sign up for email alerts so you can know how to get engaged along the way, because this process is not over. And I would even argue that our local maps are even more important than our congressional maps to some extent, because those local people are the ones who are making decisions about things that directly impact your life every day in the state of Kansas. I'd like to open it up briefly for questions on redistricting before jumping into voting rights, because that's another whole conversation that I want to hear people's thoughts on. Does anyone have any direct questions about redistricting?
Hey, Aileen, do the same rules apply to redistricting of city council and county commission districts as applied to legislative districts in regard to equality of population and so on?
Ooh, I do think equality of population, but if you're thinking about guidelines such as not breaking up communities, not, going through people's backyards, etc., I think that there's a different set of guidelines. And as far as the legal context, I'm not sure there, but that's a really good question.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Frank Tapp. Has there been a significant population shift east to west or west to east in Kansas in the past 10 years?
I think the population shift that we have seen has been from rural to urban. And so it goes without saying that some of our urban areas have expanded in size and some of our rural areas have contracted. And so there was always going to be, and needs to be, a redrawing of those lines to try to find an equal population in each of the districts. That's the main thing, equal population with a small variance, but then within those lines, making sure that we do not disenfranchise voters and that we keep communities together. So Kansas City area has definitely grown. And so we knew they would have to carve out areas around the KC Metro. But what they did was bisect it instead of cutting around the edges, which we've seen. There were a number of maps, including the League of Women Voters map, that managed to keep those populations consistent across districts without bisecting and cutting in half entire communities. Linda, it looked like you unmuted.
Can we be absolutely guaranteed that this will go to our Kansas Supreme Court so we can sleep at night?
I can't speak to what a judge may decide has grounding, but I can say that there are some very smart people working behind the scenes to file suit. So we'll see where that goes. But there's work being done behind the scenes that will become public soon. I wish I could give you an absolute yes. I wish I could.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions on redistricting? Yes, sir.
Eileen,
Uh-huh.
thank you for joining us today. Can you tell me who is responsible for creating the comic image of the elephant with the trunk going into Wyandotte County? That was just a brilliant strategy, I thought.
So it does look like an elephant, and I believe it was Representative Buchheitberger who initially said it looked like an elephant. He said it on the floor during the first vote, and then during his written statement that he had people read off during his vote to sustain the governor's veto, he also said something very funny along the lines of, I vote to sustain the governor's veto, this district still looks like an elephant. So I don't know who was in charge of drawing the cartoon, but I thought it was great. There are some very funny people in Kansas politics I would like to point out. Any other questions about redistricting? You can always reach out to me to be clear, or reach out to the coalition. So it's not a speak now or forever hold your peace situation at all. Okay, we'll get going then. I'm going to put a couple things in the chat. I was going to try to share my screen and also talk, but then I remembered I'd have a hard time looking at my notes. So I'm going to share a couple of things, but I'll also send this to Carolyn after this for distribution. So again, I want to be clear. All of the election bills that have been introduced, and this is not remotely all of them. I think we have over 20 at this point. Some of them we might agree with. Some of them don't seem to do much of anything, but we've identified the ones that we think are the most dangerous to voting rights and representation. And that's sort of where it's reflected here. Things to keep in mind about the voting or election related legislation that's been introduced. These bills are being justified by people who are pushing conspiracy theories about a stolen election. People are stating this as fact in committee hearing, but there's no evidence. People have been talking about unsafe ballot boxes, people breaking into them or setting them on fire, people harvesting ballots, which is just a word for something people do to help people get their ballot where it needs to go. This is something that is completely legal and has no evidence that it's being used for nefarious purposes. People have also talked about hacking election software. Again, in Kansas, at least, there's no evidence that this is something that is happening. But this narrative is being driven that our elections are unsafe or could be unsafe, and so we need to do something about it. The other thing I want to point out is that a lot of these bills are being pushed by an organization called Opportunity Solutions Project. They are based in Florida, and they are backed by a few very well-known conservative names. So if you go to Google News and put in Opportunity Solutions Project, you will see their name come up in state newspapers across the country, because they are in a lot of states pushing a lot of these bills. It's not just in Kansas. That doesn't mean that there aren't people in Kansas who also want to push these bills, but it is a concerted effort across the country to, what we believe, limit the vote and disenfranchise voters. So I'm going to start at the top here with some bills that were up before committee just this week. So SB 388, this bill would require that people only use the United States Postal Service when sending in their ballot. So banning the use of UPS and FedEx. So the way it was written, a shall rather than a will, there was confusion at the beginning that this would also ban ballot boxes, that it was only allowing you to take your ballot directly to the election office or send it via USPS. Senator Hildebrand, who introduced this bill, said that that was not the intent. Okay, it's not the intent. Oh, I'm getting a reminder. Okay, I'll be done soon. But there is a bill being introduced that would specifically ban ballot boxes. There's also HB 2555, and that would set up a mechanism to remove non-voters from the rolls. So to be clear, this does not violate law that we know of, because it does not immediately strike people who haven't been voting from the voter rolls. What it would do is if I haven't voted for 2 consecutive general elections, they'll send me a postcard. And if there's no affirmative response on that postcard, I then go onto a list. And then over another period of time, if I do not have election related activity, then they would remove me from the list. Both of these bills we feel would limit people's access to vote in a way that is completely unnecessary. There are other ways to clean up the voting rolls. And there's no evidence that UPS or FedEx are unsafe methods to send in ballots. So it's sort of trying to find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. The other 2 bills, SB 445 would prohibit the use of ballot boxes, and HB 2585 would require all advance voting ballots to be returned by 7 p.m. on election day. So having a grace period after the election is incredibly important, especially during the pandemic, because people don't want to go vote in person. So being able to send by mail is key. And right now, if they receive your ballot postmarked on election day, they will count that ballot. This bill would remove that 3-day grace period. So I know I rushed through that because I spent a lot of time on redistricting, but are there any questions specifically about voting related bills? Yes, Linda.
Okay, here I am again. There was a pretty good article in this morning's paper about the Secretary of State, and he seems pretty moderate on this issue and a lot more in line with what you're saying, but yet there was also mentioned that the legislature is going to try and take away some of his powers. I mean, he's pretty supportive of the voting rights that I picked up on him. And he's a Republican.
Yeah, this is not necessarily a partisan issue. I think this is a narrative that's being pushed on people. The Secretary of State, especially their general counsel, was in a number of these hearings speaking to these bills. And it seems like we're aligned on a lot of these things. But again, he's not the one making the decisions on these bills. He can speak to how the election worked and how this would impact voters and the reality of the situation, but whether or not they listen to him is a different thing entirely.
Well, I would say that from my experience, UPS and FedEx are probably more reliable than the Postal Service about delivering matters on time. So I think there'd be a very good argument to be made that the Postal Service has become unreliable.
Well, and Clay Barker, the Secretary of State's counsel, did say that people do use UPS and USPS. Sometimes it's used in, lots of different situations where someone may be out of state and sending their ballot, quickly. There are lots of reasons. And he also said that there was no evidence that these were unsafe methods of sending in a ballot. So, yeah, that's where that stands.
Has there been any prosecutions by the Secretary of State since Kobach was given his walking papers that you know of? Kobach prosecuted a few people, all turned out to be Republicans, of course, for illegal voting, or voting improperly. Have you heard?
To my knowledge, that's the last time that I heard of it.
This is Carolyn Peck. I was surprised to learn that Steve Watkins, our former congressman who got nailed for voter fraud, got a $250 fine, period. Well, he lost his job too, but still, you'd think that voter fraud might be more of an issue, especially when you're a congressman.
I'll look that up and let you know, Carolyn. That is interesting.
Hey, Eileen, is there some connection between sort of some of these bills that look on their face like they wouldn't cause a whole lot of heartburn? Like, you know, not a lot of people use FedEx to get their ballot turned in. And the more nefarious ones, like you don't get to use a ballot box at all. This looks like a pattern to me. Is it?
Yes.
From what anybody can tell?
Yes, I think I alluded to that with the Opportunities Solutions project, that outside group that's been going to a bunch of different states. And as part of this larger narrative that our elections are unsafe, and using that as a justification to limit access to voting. So some of these bills, as you said, Mary, they may not cause that much heartburn. Yes, they could disenfranchise voters, but deciding how many people they would disenfranchise, trying to put values like how much fire should my hair be on right now over this bill? Sometimes it's hard to tell with things like these voting bills. Sometimes it's very obvious. But I think what is important to recognize is that we had a slate of bills introduced that, if all implemented, would have an enormous outsized impact on the ability of Kansans to exercise their right to vote. And so while it may not be an enormous burden to implement this one we're talking about that would say only USPS, no UPS or FedEx, I don't think it's right. But is it going to disenfranchise a huge number of people? Maybe not. But taken as a whole, they can be very damaging. So the USPS bill, in conjunction with the bill that would remove the 3-day grace period, that could have a huge outsized impact. I think it was Frank said that USPS, maybe not as reliable these days. They're getting attacked from all sides, maybe not being funded as well. And then you add COVID into it. So maybe people are forced to use only USPS, and there's a mail delay, and their ballot gets there after Election Day. Well, we know from the Secretary of State's office that I think it was 32,000 people had ballots arriving during that 3-day grace period during the 2020 election. That's a lot of people who could be disenfranchised if these two things went into effect together. So yes, individually, they may not be much, but if enough of these pass, or they get thrown into a piece of legislation at the end of session that has to pass because it's so important and you can't do line item vetoes to just cut out the garbage, it could be a really big deal.
So,
Yes, Kathy.
Are they
Carolyn?
going to pass? Are these bills going to pass?
Oh, that's a good question. So the USPS bill, from what I've heard from talking to legislators and talking to people who talk to legislators, there's not a lot of energy behind that one. Setting up a mechanism to remove non-voters from the rolls, there are conversations happening with the Secretary of State to maybe make that less dangerous. So maybe instead of just stopping that bill, because we may not be able to do that, making it less harmful. As far as the ballot box and the 3-day grace period, we haven't had our hearings on that yet. And so it's difficult to tell. People can tell you anything before a hearing, but what they say in hearing on the record is really going to be indicative of how difficult this fight will be.
Hey, Carolyn, I just looked up the issue that you addressed with Stephen Watkins, and it's even more egregious than you said, because the charges were dismissed against Watkins after he completed the version. So he is no longer a felon.
Well, and that's a whole other conversation about the way the criminal legal system in this country works and how it treats different people differently. We do not have equal standing under the law because the law is assigned differently depending on who you are. I hope I haven't been too much of a downer. I think I tried to start the conversation on an inspiring note, and I really do believe that there is a way to make this process better, to make our systems more fair and equitable, and having people involved at every stage of the way is crucial to making that happen. So Carolyn did ask me to put together a list of legislative targets, and unfortunately, because this week was so crazy, I didn't have a chance to do that. But I will say, please sign up for the KS Fair Maps mailing list, and please sign up for the ACLU of Kansas volunteer list. Even if you're not going to volunteer, we send out information about what is happening. This bill is introduced. Here's why it's difficult. Take 5 minutes to send an email to your legislator, and here is how. We tried to make it very easy for you to take that step from here's an issue I care about to taking action on. So if you take anything out of this other than my gratitude to you all for caring about these issues, sign up for these mailing lists and keep an eye on your email, because even just sending an email or sending in testimony, all of that lays a record that people care and that these are the issues that are important to us. And it also lays a record for potential litigation if it ever comes to that on one of these bills. If it's absolutely horrible, we can say this many people sent in testimony stating these facts and you ignored them. So that's my pitch to you.
I'd like to thank you for coming today, and I'm really excited that seeing your face, knowing that youth is taking on these great causes that maybe I took on and numerous of us back in the Vietnam era and such did, is good. I will now, it's almost noon, so I think I can hit my first glass of wine about then, but I will sign up for the email list to keep current and try to not get too much more depressed. But thank you.
Yeah, it's on a day that we hoped would focus specifically on love and common humanity. I think the takeaway here is we've got a lot of work to do to get to the point where that common humanity is recognized across the board. I'm going to put a couple other links in the chat, but if there are any other questions, I am available and I can stay after if you would like.
I just wanted to say thank you.
I too have just a huge, and yes, and thank you also. I just have a super huge, fast question. Is there a way to have all these links in the chat in one place? Is that easy to do? Or will they just disappear?
We can save the chat and then maybe email it out after the service.
That would be great.
Yeah, I think that's doable.
And I'm going to send the document that I was screen sharing before that had the list of some of the bills and then some links out to Carolyn to share with you all. So you can click it and go directly to the ACLU volunteer sign up, or click it and go immediately to KS Fair Maps. So
this is
hopefully
David.
We can make it easy.
The chat is recorded also, and I will attempt to attach it to the YouTube video. So I think you can put attachments out there. So I'll let you know in the Facebook group what I end up doing.
All right.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Eileen, and for everybody attending today. It was good to see everybody and good discussion, lots of good information that we will be sure to share out. And I'm going to have Beth do a closing reading for us.
We are going to have a closing reading from Eric Martinez Resley, who is a cultural organizer in Washington, D.C. And it is entitled, Share a Prayer to Saint Valentine. Teach us to love unselfishly and to find great joy in giving. Help us to care for those we know and those we do not yet know. Empower us to restore dignity to those who find themselves stripped of humanity. Inspire us to support our brothers and sisters around the world. Enable all true lovers to bring out the best in each other.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate it. So I was, if you didn't notice, I was purposeful about having all the sisters represented today. That wasn't by accident. So thank you all, everyone. Eileen, Rose, Susanna, Beth, and everyone for engaging and spending some time with us on Sunday. So happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Carolyn.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.